Okay. So there is a very interesting, unique situation that arises this Shabbat, and it's caused quite a bit of controversy in the past and this year again. The last time this happened was 27 years ago. So that's one of the reasons why whenever this occurs, it causes controversy, because nobody can remember what happened last time. The truth is, there's a Gemara like that. The Gemara Pesachim talks about a case once it happened, which is going to happen this year, where Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbat. And it says the Bnei B'Tar couldn't remember. Nobody knew what happens when Erev Pesach is on Shabbat. Is Shabbat tocheh the Korban Pesach or not? The Korban Pesach tocheh Shabbat or not? So they couldn't remember until Hillel came and said. So here again, we have what is the case that comes up the Shabbat that nobody can remember. Now we have it written down. We have the stories. We have the luach, etc. But essentially, what occurs is this. Now, if you ask the question, how many days are there in a year? It's always a trick question. So everybody knows how many days in the Hebrew year, in the Jewish year. So it depends if it's a Shana Mu'beret or not. Right? There are two different answers. You can have an Adar Sheni on it. But it's not so simple, because really there are 6 different answers, because we have 2 months which are variable, can either have 29 or 30 days. So depending on if one month is Chaser or both months are Chaser, or neither month are Chaser, whether it's Shana Mu'beret or Shana Pshuta, so we have 6 different possibilities for how many days there are in a year. So because of that, because of various permutations, this year we have a Shana Mu'beret and we have 2 months which have 29 days. So all sorts of very interesting permutations which occur, which don't happen very often. So earlier this year already we had the Haftarah of Miketz, which almost never we read. We read this year. We had the Haftarah of Tazria, which almost never we read this year. We have all sorts of things coming up next year. I don't want to scare you, but we have Rosh Hashanah is the 3 days next year, right? Thursday, Friday, Rosh Hashanah, and then Shabbat. That's another reason, by the way, not to be in Chutz La'aretz for the Chagim, because they have the 3 days 3 times in a row. But we have a Shotek. We have Purim Mushulash coming up. We have Erev Pesach, Shechal B'Shabbat, all these different permutations. So what do we have this Shabbat? We have a unique situation where Achrei Mot and Kedoshim are 2 parashiot which are often read together. When they're not read together, as this year, because of the Shana Mu'beret, normally one of the 2 parashiot is either Shabbat HaGadol, or Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, or Erev Rosh Chodesh. On each of those occasions, so you have a special maftir and you have a special haftarah, which we read. So this is one of the, like I said, first time it's happened in about 27 years. And it will happen again. It happens once every 20 to 30 years, sometimes more frequently than that. But you have Achrei Mot and Kedoshim are read apart. And neither of those Shabbatot is a special Shabbat or a special Haftarah. So why is this a problem? So the Ramah tells us the end of Chelek Daled in the Mishnah Berurah, Siman Taf Kaf Chet, which is the Siman that deals with all the different Haftarot and the different permutations, Rosh Chodesh, etc. So he says like this: Kshekorin shtei parshiot maftirin ba'achrona. As we know, when we have a double parsha, the Haftarah comes from the second one. Milvad b'achrei mot u'kedoshim. There is one exception to this rule, that is achrei mot and kedoshim. Umaftirin halo kivnei kushim. That is the Haftarah from Amos. That is really the first of the 2 Haftarot. But we always read the says she Haftarat achrei mot. Okay, that's all he says. Why is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, she Haftarat achrei mot, mipnei she'Haftarah shel parasha shniya mazkeret mituavat Yerushalayim. But if you look in the Haftarah of Kedoshim, that's printed in the Chumashim, it comes from Yechezkel. It's actually called Hatishpot, and has very, very harsh things to say about Yerushalayim, about the things that were going on in Yerushalayim at that time, and it's very, very disparaging. We don't want to read. We don't want to read that. He says, "Masha'en ken shenifradot shekvar karu alo kivnei kushim beparashat acharei bechleach laftir beparashat Kedoshim Hatishpot." Now, according to the Mishnah Berurah, again, what the Ramah says that it's just when the 2 parashot are read together. So normally we would have read the second Haftarah. Here we read the first one. But he says when they're apart, you would still read each one in its week. That is according to the Mishnah Berurah. Now it goes on. There's a little bit of a discussion, and like I say, many times when the parashot are read separately. So whichever one of those parashiot does not have a regular haftarah, either the haftarah of Shabbat HaGadol or or Rosh Chodesh, or Erev Rosh Chodesh. For the other parsha, whichever it is, Achrei Mot or Kedoshim, the minhag has become that we read the Haftarah of Achrei Mot. Right? Exactly when this happened and how it developed and whatever it is, it's not clear. But certainly within Yerushalayim, that was the minhag, and that has been the minhag for many generations. That is what is done. That we do whatever we can to avoid reading that Haftarah. Again, we don't want to read disparaging words about Yerushalayim and about what was going on. We also, it's interesting. All of this is based on a dat yachid, right? That's a good question. It's a good question. Why was it put in the first place? So apparently there was it's brought that's the Haftarah, but Minhag Yisrael Torah, that throughout the generations there was an aversion to reading this section. It's actually a machloket Tanaim. The last Mishnah, Masechet Megillah, talks about certain sections of Torah and Navi which are read or which are not read, and you should not translate, etc. And it says, Masechet Megillah ends off like this: En maftirin b'merkava, Rabbi Yehuda matir, Rabbi Eliezer omer, En maftirin b'hodayet Yerushalayim. That is the Haftarah which we're talking about, Haftarah in question of Kedoshim, which we don't read. Explains the Kahati here, B'chezkel perek tetzayin amatchil ben Adam, Hodayet Yerushalayim et toavotea, u'mvar atam b'mfarshim, mishum kvod Yerushalayim u'kvod Yisrael. Therefore, out of the honor of Yerushalayim, the honor of Israel, we try and avoid reading it. So whenever we have an excuse that one of the two parashiyot, we have a different parashah, we just switch it off, so that's fine. But when you have a year like this, when you really there's no excuse, that's we've already read the first parasha. Normally we'd say the Haftarah of Achrei Mot will read as the Haftarah of Kedoshim. But this year we've already read the Haftarah of Achrei Mot. What will we do for Kedoshim again? So you may or may not be surprised to hear that the widespread minhag is that we read the same Haftarah twice, 2 weeks in a row. Right? Most people aren't paying attention, so they don't notice. But that is the minhag, and there are some amazing stories that, like I said, there's a long history to this, but amazing stories throughout the generations. The last few times this has happened. So I have here, this was told by Rav Yoel Katan, who is a Rav in Shalavim. And he says the following, he says, Maseh Shaya, B'pam HaKodemet, I don't know if this was the last time or maybe before, but Shechala Shana Kazo, Lifnei K20 Shana, Pel Rav Adari Zatzal Rosh Yeshivat HaKotel, Kedarko Minyan Vatikin, B'Yeshivat Shalavim. Rav Adari was the Rosh Yeshiva of HaKotel, and he had family in Shalavim, so whenever it was, he would go there and he would spend Shabbatot there sometimes. So he says, Af Pam Hu Lo Haya Mitaref B'Shum Davar. He let the Gabayim do what they do. He wouldn't get involved with anything. B'Shabbat Kedoshim HaMeduberet, Hu Pashut Mana B'Gufo Et Kirat HaTishbot. I don't know exactly what it says. He wouldn't let them. He wouldn't let them take it out. Would not let them read it. And at the Daimat HaNochachim Hu Amar, שמנהג גדולי ירושלים לקרוא שוב, הלא כבני כושים וכך צריכים לנהוג. He said this is the minhag of גדולי ירושלים, that they would read that Haftarah again, and that's what you have to do. ופשוט הכריח את הקורא לקרוא הלא כבני כושים, למרות שאף אחד מהמתפללים, כולל רבנים חשובים, לא שמע עד אז על המנהג הזה. Nobody else had heard of the minhag, but he would not let them do it. That was the thing. There's also a story that happened in the Beit Knesset Agra a number of years ago. In this neighborhood, very similar story where essentially the same thing happened, and tell you of Balei Kriya who came and would just refuse to read this section. What I find amazing about all these stories is, again, we think we're reading the Haftarah, we read this, we read that. What difference does it make? Well, see how careful, first of all, how seriously people took, and not just for the sake of a fight, but how seriously people took which Haftarah you read, what are the words you're reading, what do they mean, and the lengths to which the Yerushalayim and others went to avoid having to speak disparagingly about Eretz Yisrael, to avoid having to speak disparagingly about Yerushalayim. And that is, maybe that's the Musar Haskell that we can take as we read the Haftarah this week and read the Haftarah next week. Again, same Haftarah. Yichalanya ben Akash, Omer, Zakadosh Baruch Hu, Zakot Yisrael, Tichach B'Alem Torah Mitzvot, Shnei Madonech V'Tzman, Sidko, Yagdir Torah V'Yadir.